Betsy Wade once said, "I think a successful career in journalism is to contribute something to the strengthening of democracy," and that she most certainly did. And so I feel proud that I will be introducing the recipient of the 2016 Silurians Lifetime Achievement Award, and especially proud that she is a fellow copy editor. There are so many ways of introducing her. One of the best, I feel, is to quote from the lead graph in Mike Candel's article about Betsy in the current edition of the Silurian News. Mike writes, "Not many people can be credited with helping change the course of journalistic history, but we Silurians can be proud that one of them is our own longtime devoted member, Betsy Wade. In addition to a distinguished newspaper career, which itself merits this award, Betsy is enshrined in history as a leading member of the group of brave and intrepid women who challenged the New York Times for its treatment of female employees." Well, Betsy has called that the most important thing we did in our careers, and many women journalists who owe their careers to Betsy would agree. But in addition, there were so many other firsts for Betsy. For instance, first woman copy editor in the paper's then 105-year-old history. This was 1956. First woman to be chief copy editor on the foreign desk, 1972. A founding member of the newspaper's Women's Caucus formed by a group of women in 1972 to address a growing concern about gender issues at the Times. First woman to serve as president of the New York local of the Newspaper Guild, the largest in the nation, 1979. And of course, one of 7 women employees to become plaintiffs in a groundbreaking class action suit against the Times in 1974 for gender discrimination. Because she used her married name, Boylan, the case is etched in history as Elizabeth Boylan et al. Plaintiffs versus the New York Times Company defendant. Wade's husband is Jim Boylan, founding editor of the Columbia Journalism Review, and both of them are veteran Silurians. Yeah. Some of those other history-making women who put their careers and livelihoods on the line are with us tonight, and later they may even want to say a few nice words about Betsy. Maybe. Betsy has given us a glimpse of those women by sending me these following descriptions. We could now go to table 8. Nancy Davis. Nancy was the youngest of the 7, full of vitality and with a good sales career ahead of her. But she had the courage to step up and join the others in representing all 600-odd of the women employed by the Times. Had there been a trial, she, like the other named plaintiffs, would have been a witness describing her life as a salesperson in the largest all-women department at the paper. Not surprisingly, she left the paper for a better job before the suit was resolved, but she remained a member of the class of women identified as suing the Times. She was on the portico of the federal court in Foley Square on the day of settlement. Grace Gluck. Grace, writes Betsy, should be seen as the lady with the quill pen, first drafting the list of inequities to be placed before the management. Joan Cook said she always thought of Grace as Myrna Loy, sharp of wit, fashionable of hat, and daring in the jungle. She is retired now, living with a retired Times spouse, the splendid Milt Freudenheim, in a West Side home glutted with art books and a piano. And of course, Harriet Robb. Harriet, at the moment, is counsel to the Rockefeller University. She was the lead lawyer for Boylan et al. When the gang finally decided it was court or death. In the 70s, when she undertook to shepherd the Times women through the legal maze involved in the Title VII civil rights case. She had already been through a second effort to resolve a similar suit at Newsweek, and a more complicated and wretched case at the Reader's Digest. Harriet had been an associate of RBG, the G stands for Ginsburg, before Ginsburg joined the Supreme Court. Harriet, however, will always be a supreme in Time's women's lives. And we also have Benilde Rosario. We also have Benilde Rosario. Benilde was the only named plaintiff in Rosario versus the New York Times Company, a case parallel to the Seven Women's. She represented all of the Times non-white employees. The case, which was handled by lawyers for the Newspaper Guild, went on much longer than the women's case, and by then the rules for class actions changed, and not for the better. And so, Betsy, did I keep it short enough? Before we move on, before Betsy says a word before Betsy says a word to us, I'd like to present her with this plaque, the Society of the Silurians Lifetime Achievement Award, presented to Betsy Wade, in recognition of your distinguished career as a trailblazing editor, columnist, union official, and educator, and for your leadership in fighting for the rights of women journalists everywhere. Betsy Wade.
Thank you all very much. Am I speaking up enough? All right, we'll get all the way up there. Hello. How did I get here in this seat? I have no idea. I studied the Silurians list of 43 previous winners of this award, and I could not detect. I think we need a more oomph here. Should we lift it up? Yeah, okay. All right. Are we there now? But I could see nothing in my wood-burning computer that told me why I would have been added to this list. Steinem, I am not. Although she gave us the best of allies, and her talk here about her 10 top reasons for being a journalist was really worthwhile. The late Judith Christ, whose seat I hold on the Ann O'Hare McCormick Fund, taught at Columbia for 50 years, an achievement deserving of any award you've got. But what I thought I could teach, I couldn't do much with the following: Patrick Buchanan, Maynard Parker, Bill Connolly, Joe Lelyveld, and Irene Morada Santiago. I gave up after 8 years. I am certainly not as gritty as Barbara Crossett. She was spattered with blood at the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. She was smuggled out of India that night, but first she filed 3 dispatches to the New York Times. She had been warning that this would happen for months, but who listens? Nor am I as much a pioneer as Marlene Sanders, who broke in broadcast journalism, pioneered in war correspondence, and brought up a brilliant son, Jeffrey Toobin, despite the impossibility of organizing a family if you're working online. Nor can I fill the shoes of Myron Kandel, who won the top financial spot at the Herald Tribune and then went over to become a Bigfoot of CNN. And I'm an old person, yes. But take a look at the staggering life of Ruth Gruber if the question is longevity. Finally, and probably definitively, none of the previous honorees, from the first Walter Cronkite to the most recent, Gay Talese, was a copy editor. How did I? So I'll stand in this spotlight, heir to my betters, to tell some tales hanging on the rubric. Liquor is the curse of the Tribune, and sex is the bane of the Times. Do you think Hollywood would call to ask why I swam in the Pulitzer Fountain, fully dressed, in the early post-midnight hours of a summer's night? A mother of two? A copy editor at a dignified paper? Doing that? Youth and booze, of course. But there was another fourth factor. Some of us at the Times City desk worked with a Swede on the late shift, Rolf Stromberg. He eventually returned to the Northwest and taught journalism. After a while, we got a communique. Rolf said a brilliant, beautiful, talented student of his would visit New York soon and pay a call upon us. She was genteel, and we were to behave ourselves. Knowing Rolf, all quite suspect. In time, a Sequoia Virgin arrived, and Rolf did not exaggerate. When a few of us got a good night, we agreed to meet in the raunchy area of the Lower West Side, then known as the Casbah, all full of belly dance joints. We were sure this would give her the flavor of post-shift Gotham. We ordered beer. The Westerner wanted a gin and tonic. Okay. After a quick study, this young woman said that the performers were a disappointment to her. She helped herself to another gin and a scarf and took the floor. When she was done with her dance, back bends and all, a number of the habitués brought her drinks, for which she downed neatly. We got her out of there pretty quick because we were developing a cash flow problem. We decided to visit a journalism landmark, the Joseph Pulitzer Fountain at 59th Street. You will see it on the cover of your program. When we arrived, we were all sweating, the way I am now, actually. And it was a bit warm. It was probably 2 a.m., so into the water we went with me in the lead. It was very cooling. Someone gave me $10, and I took the Sequoia Virgin in a cab to our place in Upper Manhattan, which had spare rooms. It's always fun to point the fountain out to the kids and say, I got wet there one night. They are incredulous. Now I suppose my one-night stand at the New York Hilton, which doesn't exactly equate with the bane of sex, but you could view it that way. As many of you know, the Times in early 1971 began covertly seeking staff volunteers for a piece of journalism known then only as Project X. Those who were recruited were asked without explanation if they were prepared to go to jail. This was roughly before I began my 5-year stint as head of the foreign copy desk. But I was already on the foreign desk and familiar with Da Nang, Agent Orange, Raymond Morrison Knudsen, Brown, Root, and Jones, and other parts of the Vietnam War. Among other things, I got the difficult task of editing David Halberstam's piece on the coup d'etat in 1963, in which the South Vietnamese president was killed. The great Jerry Gold had already made his perilous trip from Washington to New York with a suitcase of super-secret Xeroxed material beside him. Copies of copies of copies of stolen government documents. Neil Sheehan, Rick Smith, Ned Kenworthy, Linda Amster, Fox Butterfield, Linda Charlton, Sam Apt, Al Siegel, they were God knows where, carrying out other parts of this uncertain business, I was asked to join the team. It was school vacation time, and I had scheduled a week's vacation to let our son Richard look at colleges. I told his father, Jim, that the Times wanted to postpone my vacation till later. Not a real lie. And we agreed uneasily to let Richard shepherd his younger brother, Ben, who was here with us, to Chicago and then to Iowa City, where Jim would pick them up. I checked our sons in at LaGuardia, suffering the usual conflicts of all working parents, and reported to the Hilton, where a long string of rooms had been linked to form a writing-editing factory. And there, in this turmoil of coffee cups, stress, half-eaten sandwiches, writer's blocks, and thousands of mismatched Xerox pages, were my missing co-workers. To protect security, the Hilton was under firm orders to let only one hotel cleaner into the suite, no matter what happened. Tall cabinets full of stolen files were pushed against interior doors. Every night for several weeks, Bob Rosenthal, later famous, then a spirited young clerk, locked himself into the suite and slept uneasily among the file cabinets until the morning shift arrived. With the passage of weeks, Bob's amour de saison had grown restless in her own apartment. She was not permitted to join him, and like my family, she had no idea where Bob really was, nor, God forbid, what he was doing. No cell phones. Since my family was in Iowa, I asked Bob if he wanted to take a night off from his isolation to see his lady friend, and I would take his place sleeping amongst the stolen papers. The editors agreed. If you are prepared for a blue movie about Betsy and Daniel Ellsberg, forget it. We at the Hilton factory never even heard the name Ellsberg until the night Project X went to press. And that was an accident. Bob Rosenthal said that a call came into the suite. He thinks the number was 1111, seeking Neil Sheehan, who wasn't there. The caller identified himself as Daniel Ellsberg, someone none of us had ever heard of. So my night was quiet in the large. Was that 6 rooms or more, Linda? Linda, do you remember how many rooms there were in there? It was more than 6 rooms? Well, I didn't sleep in all 6 of them. And with the Midtown glow out there and me indoors, guarding so far as I knew, all of our lives and liberty. Because Jerry Gold is the last gone from us, I want to tell you the story that Jerry told us. They sent Jerry back. I hope I'm being heard. They sent Jerry back to the hotel to give the single cleaning person who had been allowed into the room a larger tip than was going to be put on anybody's expense account. And he walked in and he found her and he said, "We thank you very much for doing all of the strange things you were required to do." And she said, "I know what you are doing, and in my country you would be in jail." And Jerry said, "What is your country?" And she said, "Haiti." Besides booze, sex, and theft of government documents, what other elements does a New York journalist involve himself in? Well, you can drag your disbelieving employer into federal court at Foley Square for violating the civil rights of its employees under Title VII. Standing where I am now, I can see many of their faces, and a few other people who rode the wave of the battle for equality from the 60s into the 70s and sued the Times for discrimination. Benilde Rosario over there. Yes. Stand up, please, Benilde. She was the chief named plaintiff for the non-white employees. Being a woman and a hugely successful salesperson for the Times, she bore up well. Over there is our fellow Silurian, Ursula Mahoney, whose saintly looks conceal a brilliant organizer. And there is Sharon Yakata, now a leader of the New York Women's City Club, whose precise work in the Times circulation department caused one of her reference letters to describe her as probably a troublemaker. Grace Lichtenstein, who held the initial firecracker under Abe Rosenthal's nose, is there. Grace Gluck, writer of the original manifesto, is over there. Nancy Davis, the only one of its named plaintiffs young enough to quit and get another job, is there. Eventually, there were 7 named plaintiffs selected to represent the 600 women in the suit. Louise Carini of accounting, Joan Cook of the news department, Eileen Shanahan of the Washington Bureau, Andrea Skinner of the fashion department, Nancy Davis over there, Grace Glick, and me under my payroll name of Elizabeth Boylan. Joan, Louise, Andy, and Eileen have since died. Nancy, Grace, and I are here for a rare reunion, courtesy of the Silurians. Harriet Rabb, the best of all possible lawyers, now counsel for the Rockefeller University, insisted on coming, and she's over there. My career at the Times was 45 years minus a few weeks. Before the Times in 1952, when I had just graduated from journalism school, I worked more than a year for the Herald Tribune. It was wonderful, and I met and was befriended by the reporter Joan Cook, who showed me everything she could before she left for 6 weeks maternity leave. Eugenia Shepard gave me enough training to keep me from foundering in the fashion show, and best of all, Clementine Paddleford, the food editor of both the Trib and This Week magazine, gave me every break available. It turned out she was an old Chicago colleague of my stepmother's. I had a joyful time at the Trib. 4 days a week we ate liverwurst sandwiches in the counter of the test kitchen, and 1 lunch a week we splurged at Blake's, where the lampshades were ornamented with our bylines. When Eugenia returned from the Paris collections, and I told her I was pregnant, they fired me. Then I worked a couple of years more for NEA Service, a syndicate where the greatest cash cow was the Dion quintuplets. Disguised in an NEA nom de plume, Alicia Hart, I was the beauty columnist for a raft of client papers across the country. In company with my classmate, Ed Cannell, who had recommended me for the job, we cranked out supplements called Back to School, Outdoor Living, Beautify Your Home, and so forth. My battered wooden Scripps Howard desk, anybody work for Scripps Howard, you know the desks belong to Scripps Howard, not to the desk, not to the publication. My battered wooden Scripps Howard desk was between the Manhattan phone book and the big dictionary, a busy crevice. Both Harry Grayson Sr. and the sports editor and his assistant Jimmy Breslin smoked cigars, and they often left the stubs in to mark their places. But my situation did enable me to come to know the entire staff, including printers, retouchers, and stereotypers. As was my long habit, I took off my shoes at work. One day, Jimmy Nick picked them up and heaved them out of our office window, 14 stories above 8th Avenue. Then he took the elevator to the Smith's Bar and Grill across the street for lunch. I knew that an appeal to management was a no-go, so I took the back elevator, the one labeled, "This car don't stop at Askins," and went outside where I found my shoes, picked them up, and walked into Smith's bar, where I held them out to Jimmy. "Put 'em on," I said, and he did, but not exactly like Prince Charming. Some years later, when I was on the Times City desk, Gay Talese stopped by my seat. "Someone at Guff's wants to meet you," he said. I crossed with Gay, and there was Jimmy sitting at the round table. Gay started in. "Jimmy, this is—" "Never mind," Jimmy said. "I already know her, and she is one tough broad." I retired in June of 2001 on the occasion of a Times buyout. Leaving in June is not great. If you leave on January 2nd, when the taxes are more becomingly arranged, you get a lot more money. But wherever one looks around, one looks for something to do. Jim Boylan, the founder of the Columbia Journalism Review and a professor of history, and journalism emeritus at UMass, my husband was somewhat the same. Our friend Rita Henley Jensen, founder of Women's E-News over there, got together with us and we created a historical New York downtown walking tour focused on women, mainly in journalism, with a pivot on Newspaper Row, a block from her new office for Women's E-News. One of Jim's teaching specialties was the muckrakers, and of course that made fascinating stories put into our hands. Ruth Ovington, a white founder of the NAACP, Margaret Sanger, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, plus a leader of a women's typographical union. So I went to the municipal agency and I passed a test for professional tour guide, and we set up to do good work. In time, Rita encouraged a Girl Scout troop in Brooklyn to give a badge for knowledge of our tour called Opening the Way. We did a couple of books for the Stonington, Connecticut Historical Society, too. So I guess that's what I am doing here, or more correctly, what we are all doing here, opening the way for the next generation, looking at the horizon, emulating the long arc of Ruth Gruber. I was reminded again 2 weeks ago that the cast is always changing. My door buzzed, and to my unspeakable surprise, there was Arthur Ox Sulzberger with an envelope in his hand and a dog on a leash. Handwritten. I regret that I will not be at the Silurians' dinner, at which you will be honored. But I wanted you to know how pleased I am that you will be getting this most distinguished award. Congratulations, and thank you for making the New York Times and our world a better place through all of your effort. This acknowledgement, this time I really want to be sure you hear me. This acknowledgement, and I believe it speaks to all of us who challenged our employer 40 years ago, also recognizes a need for listening to the others who are always amongst us. As the remarkable Gwen Ifill put it, this country will only flourish once we consistently learn to applaud and to encourage the young people who have worked harder just to achieve a balance on the unequal playing field. Thanks to all the Silurians for this honor.
I'm so grateful that Jim and Betsy worked so hard and wrote so eloquently. about all the women on whose shoulders we stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita Henry Jensen. Any other words of wisdom? If not, we're going to go to our dessert. Thank you.